we have care resources. And the idea is that we created a tiered system about how to help people move from the least intense option up to the most intense option. So the most intense option is at the top. Those are combined services. That's life-threatening stuff. That's dialing 911. Those are limited resources, but they're also there. And so you could see, based on this approach, the idea is that instead of finding someone in crisis and calling the most intense resource, we're going to have skills and tools to employ to help people move up the ladder as needed. So we're going to come back to that, but that's just kind of the idea, is that this is sort of the base layer of care resources that we're going to provide. And so these skills are going to be employed at that level. Okay, so when we think about spiritual first aid, what are we talking about? Hey guys, are you seeing the slide change? You're muted there, Brad. Give me a sound check. The slide didn't change. Yeah, I was doing the same thing, and I couldn't get the slide to move. So here, I'm just gonna. Did that move it?
Yes.
Great. All right. So, got 3 core action principles. So these 3 principles encompass many actions, and we're going to talk about those action steps. But essentially, when we think about spiritual first aid, very intuitive, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about leaning in and assessing as we initiate contact. Then the bulk of what we're doing is listening, and then we're connecting people. Not just we're connecting with them, but also connecting them to resources as next steps. And the listening part, just so you know, is not just us passively, hearing somebody speak and letting them. It's engaging with them, so it's active listening. So we're speaking to them. We're using reflective listening skills. We're using supportive language to help support them, empower them. So listening is a principle, but it comes with a dialogue. But just as we think about now, are you guys seeing the action principles there? Okay, good. These action principles and spiritual first aid is really is sitting on top of and is referencing one of the core modalities that we've learned through research, through mass trauma events, through natural disasters. That is the base layer of care that can be employed by anyone. So this is based on the model of psychological first aid, which is administered through volunteers as events unfold and people are in crisis. Think of a hurricane, think of a flood, think of a fire or an earthquake. And so in those situations, we have to employ tools that most people can use, that don't require a professional, that can be deployed by people like yourselves who want to stand on the front lines and receive people. So these action principles and what you're going to hear are underpinned by evidence-based research on things that we know work. Now we're contextualizing them for where we are, because we're a church and we offer Christ-centered community and spiritual care, and so we're going to be focusing on those aspects and putting it in that context. But we know that there is excellent research that shows these are very effective tools at this stage of our pandemic. Okay, so what is spiritual first aid? It's intentional, focused spiritual support and practical assistance to help those suffering from prolonged exposure to serious stressors. That involves non-intrusive help, accessing spoken needs, and eliciting other concerns. So we're also asking good questions. It's comforting people. It's helping them feel safe. It's helping them access basic needs, because when someone's in crisis, they're not doing their highest level of thinking often. And that's not a dig. That's just saying, hey, when we get ramped up emotionally and we're feeling that our perceptions are skewed and we're not seeing the steps that are in front of us, and so we need people to come alongside us and help us in this situation. So we're going to talk about that. But that's what it is. Here's what it's not. It's not something only professionals do, whether they're pastors or counselors. It's not professional counseling. It's not therapy. Spiritual first aid is not psychological debriefing. So the goal here is not to help people unpack everything about what's going on. Now, of course, we're going to listen to their stories, but the idea is that we need to be listening for ways that we can concretely help them spiritually, and also help empower them to take the steps that they can. And we're going to be diving into how to do that and elicit that through questions. So while we're available to listen to stories, we're not pressuring people to tell their stories. We're not helping them unpack all those feelings and gain insight. So we're helping them stay moving and stay empowered. Okay. What do we know about this kind of care? People do better over the long run. So this layer of care actually has the long view in mind. And we know through the research, when we help people in this way through crisis, sets them up better on the other side of the crisis for recovery, because there is that phase as well. And we're going to have training and employ people to walk with others in those later phases. But we know that the skills employed here that you're training on actually set them up for better post-traumatic recovery. And so you can see there, we know that it helps them feel calm and safe, helps hope stay in view, and they have access to spiritual and emotional support. So who needs spiritual first aid? Distressed people who have been and are being exposed to serious stressful events. And you're thinking, well, who isn't, right? Well, that's everyone. But remember how we said that we're all on this journey and we all start out with our limited resources. And so along the way, there will be different points at which people hit their wall. Some of you have run marathons, some of you run 10Ks. You've had these running events where you know, hey, here's my level of training, here's my level of fitness. I'm going to start this race. And I know there's a point at which I'm going to hit that limit of my fitness, hit that limit of my ability, and I'm going to then have to struggle and push through that. That's the same here with spiritual and emotional support. Everyone starts out with their set limit, and then we're going to have to help people get through that wall, if you will, or that hard point. So it's people who are overwhelmed by their circumstances and find themselves unable to cope spiritually and emotionally. That's going to be important. We're going to do some vignettes as we get deeper into this, and we'll look at what are some cases that we can talk about where we can see that and then know what to do. But that's who needs it. Who needs more than spiritual first aid? We're also going to talk about that in our cases, because there are going to be clues that people give us that say, okay, this was helpful, but there's going to need to be more. But here are some obvious ones. People with life-threatening injuries. That's dial a 911. People so upset that they can no longer care for other people in their care. That's also something where we have to find other resources to come in and assist. People who may hurt themselves. People who may hurt or endanger the lives of others. And so we have, and these are things that we have dealt with before the pandemic at Mariners, when we engage people on the weekend in other pastoral care environments, and we have policies in place for these. But these are simply categories of people who need more than spiritual first aid, and there'll be follow-up that we'll talk about later. Okay, when to move into spiritual first aid. Now, I would contend that anybody who is calling or is engaging someone virtually, because that's obviously the dominant way that we're going to be communicating with people right now, and we're not going to be seeing them face to face. It's going to be more difficult to pick up on the physical cues because we're not with them. So we're going to have to pay close attention to our screens and to who's on the other end of the line. But essentially, here's some of the signs. When someone is exhibiting signs of stress or panic, shortness of breath, hypervigilance, which means in this context, we're not going to be able to pick up on that except through language, maybe body language on the screen that you can pick up. That's jumpy, looking over their shoulder, racing speech, unable to complete thoughts. So you'll start talking in one direction and then they'll quickly move into another direction. And their speech is sometimes pressured, which means there's an urgency behind everything they say. And they don't know how to turn that off, even when you're slowing down and offering them a calm approach. But then there's unable to control emotions. Those are some of the things that tell us, okay, someone might be in crisis. I need to make sure that I'm staying on my spiritual first aid. Okay, where can you do it? Well, we're going to be doing it virtually right now. You can do it in person and on the phone, but right now I think be prepared that this is going to happen in a 2D format. Ideally, privacy is important to preserve confidentiality and dignity. So it's worthwhile to make sure that there is space for them to be private. Okay, so that's some of the who, what, and where. Here are the 8 core actions. So when we think about the principles, lean in, assess, listen, and connect, each of those 3 principles, we're going to be walking through these actions. Now, so you'll hear them in everything that we talk about from here on out. But those actions are engagement, safety and comfort, prayer and stabilization, information gathering, practical assistance. We're going to be taking that action. Connecting people with social support. Again, we're taking that action as we're handing off. Information and coping, and then connecting people with collaborative services. Okay, so there at the bottom, there's a note, if you can see that on your screen, guys. If some of you want to get the full 6-hour certified training for psychological first aid, which is the training regimen that this training is based on, I would highly encourage you to have at it. Some of you love to train. You like to have those things in your belt. It's really good. It's just like this. It's video-based. What I'm giving you is a contextualized version that's condensed to get us the basics so that we can begin to employ these skills under these action steps.